we are on. Wonderful.
Okay, nice to see some old friends here. And I thank you for, John, for calling me esteemed. I assume that's a polite word for being old. That's more what I feel like these days. At any rate, my talk today is from my new, actually forthcoming later this month, my newest book from Cambridge University Press called Evolution and the Fate of Humankind. And I'm going to focus here on the final payoff or prescription chapter. The chapter is called Unite or Die, and the subtitle could be Toward a New Social Contract for Our Endangered Species. So let's get started. The famous words unite or die were used in a pamphlet by Benjamin Franklin in 1774 when the American colonies were close to a declaration of independence from the British Crown. Nowadays, though, these words could also be applied to the future of all mankind, for we are in a historic choice point, as it were, for the entire human species and possibly for the fate of life on Earth. Currently, we're headed toward a dark future with ever more terrorist attacks, divisive guerrilla wars, and even possibly a World War III with nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and cyber weapons. Not to mention the drastic and irreversible climate change that's going on. Personally, I am alarmed by what is reported to be going on in the Arctic. And of course, we're all, because of the news, we're all aware of the fires in Los Angeles. I kind of take that personally because I was born in Pasadena and grew up my first few years on Malibu Beach. So I'm a Californian, and it's sort of close to home for me. So the solution to this growing challenge coming from many quarters is not really to rely on some charismatic, self-serving, authoritarian leader. You may have somebody in mind. The world tried doing this back in the 1930s, and it didn't end well. We had World War II. As the ancient Greek political theorist Plato put it more than 2,000 years ago, the problem with this alternative is how do you control the controllers? A much better alternative is a more effective global governance under the rule of law. With a new social contract that will provide for the basic needs of everyone, a basic needs guarantee, along with rewards for merit and giving back in proportion to what we receive. I call it the fair society model. We must also make major changes and improvements to the United Nations and create new UN agencies with the authority and the resources to address our mounting global crises. Here, I'll briefly outline my prescription for the future. It's spelled out in more detail in my forthcoming new book. In the 20th century, the Greek theorist Plato's famous warning against the seductive lure of dictators was updated by the great British wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Churchill may have had Adolf Hitler and Mussolini in mind when he famously quipped, quote, "Democracy is the worst form of government except for all those others that have been tried from time to time." Plato, in his early writings, envisioned a philosopher king, a leader who would combine the absolute power to govern with the dispassionate wisdom of a trained philosopher. This is what he proposed in his seminal political tract, The Republic, in about 375 BC. What's often overlooked, however, is that Plato's subtitle, which was concerning concerning justice, his ultimate purpose was to achieve a just society. Later on in his life, Plato came to realize that his philosopher king concept was unrealistic. And in his last book, The Laws, he proposed a second best alternative in which all the interests would be represented and everyone would be subject to the rule of law. The founding fathers of the American Republic embodied Plato's mature ideas in our Constitution, which has lasted for almost 250 years so far. American democracy is far from perfect, obviously. However, Churchill got it right. Even authoritarian leaders these days use lies and sham elections to legitimize themselves, and they have a very poor record of good governance in the public interest. Is this really what we want? I think we can do better. The basic challenge that we all face, all of humankind, and the basic purpose of any organized society is biological survival and reproduction. We are all participants in a collective survival enterprise. Each of us has no less than 14 basic needs, absolute requisites for our survival and reproduction over time. These needs are discussed in detail in my 2011 book, The Fair Society, The Science of Human Nature and the Pursuit of Social Justice. These needs include a number of obvious categories like food, water, waste elimination, and physical safety, as well as some categories that are less obvious but equally important to us, like adequate sleep, thermal regulation, and healthy respiration. Going forward, our global social contract must include a basic needs guarantee for everyone. The case for this principle is grounded in 4 propositions, I think. First, our basic needs are increasingly well understood and documented. 2, although our individual needs vary somewhat, they are shared by all of us. 3, we are dependent on many others for the satisfaction of these needs. And 4, severe harm may result if those needs are not satisfied. There's also evidence that this policy has wide public support. See the evidence in my 2018 book, Synergistic Selection. However, there are 2 other very important fairness precepts. Our basic needs take priority, but it's also important to recognize the many differences in merit among us and to reward and punish them as appropriate. The principle of just deserts in our relationships is another way of viewing this. In addition, there must also be reciprocity, a proportionate commitment from everyone to support the collective survival enterprise. We must all contribute a fair share in return to balance the scale of benefits and costs. I believe this recipe, equality, equity, and reciprocity, I call it the fair society model, is coupled with global governance and the rule of law, is the formula that we need for our emerging global superorganism. Democratic global governance under the rule of law is an essential framework for coping with our emerging survival crisis. But there is one more important thing: the values and outcomes in our global economy. Our ecological crisis has many contributing causes, but the root of the problem is modern capitalism. It is at once an ideology, an economic system, a bundle of technologies, and an elaborate superstructure of supportive institutions, laws, and practices that have evolved over hundreds of years. Capitalism has the virtue of rewarding innovation, initiative, and personal achievement, but it's also grounded in a flawed set of assumptions about the nature and purpose of human societies and our implicit social contract. Its core values are skewed. In the idealized capitalist model, an organized society is essentially a marketplace where goods and services are exchanged in arm's length transactions among autonomous, quote, purveyors who are independently pursuing their own self-interests. This model is in turn supported by the assumption that our motivations can be reduced to the efficient pursuit of our personal tastes and preferences, as they put it. We're all rational utility maximizers, or homo economicus in the time-honored term. But this is all for the best, because it will on balance produce the greatest good for the greatest number, to use the mantra of utilitarianism. The corollary of this assumption is that there should be an unrestrained right to private property and the accumulation of wealth because, in theory, this will generate the new capital required to achieve further economic growth, and more growth in turn will lead to still more wealth. The foundational expression of this model, quoted in virtually every Economics 101 textbook, is Adam Smith's invisible hand metaphor. As Smith expressed it in The Wealth of Nations, quote, "Man is led by an invisible hand to promote an end which is no part of his intention. Nor is it always the worse for society that it is not part of it. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of society more effectively than when he really intends to promote it. In spite of their natural selfishness and rapacity, men are led by an invisible hand to advance the interest of society." The modern Nobel economist Robert Solow in 1957 summed up what has been called, sometimes derisively, utopian capitalism as a compound of equilibrium, greed, and rationality. The well-known senior economist Samuel Bowles, in his 2004 book, did a critique and revisioning of economic theory with the unassuming title Microeconomics. He points out that capitalist doctrine offers an odd utopia. Its strongest claims are generally false. It's unable to make reliable predictions. It removes from these models many of the factors that shape real-world economics. It ignores the pervasive and inescapable fact of the influence of wealth and power in shaping how real economies work. And not least, it's profoundly unfair. It systematically favors capital over labor, with results that are evident in our skewed economic statistics and widespread poverty. The senior economist John Gowdy some years ago candidly acknowledged that, quote, "Economic theory not only describes how resources are allocated, it also provides a justification for wealth, poverty, and exploitation." It happens that two more socially responsible alternative models have emerged in recent years. One has the suggestive title stakeholder capitalism. It calls for institutional arrangements that would equitably advance the interest of all the stakeholders in society. In other words, merit is a major criterion. The other alternative, proposed by the Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz in 2024, is what he calls progressive capitalism. He argues that the time has come to abandon what has also been called neoliberalism, after such economists as Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, in favor of a model that better serves all the citizens of a community, including a social safety net and, more important, freedom from fascism. Progressive capitalism, which already exists in some countries like Norway and Denmark, will better serve the greater good, Stiglitz argues. So what are the implications? The comedian Mort Saul's ironic observation many years ago that the future lies ahead underscores the fact that the future is not what it used to be. Indeed, the future starts now, and our species is in serious peril. We must urgently change our basic survival strategy as a species. As detailed in my new book, The Time Has Come for Global Governance. We are increasingly interdependent and are now facing massive and prolonged environmental challenges that most countries can't deal with alone, especially if they start preparing for them only after the disaster has occurred. So we must act collectively to build a sustainable global superorganism, as I call it, or else. Ideally, we should mobilize the needed resources, management systems, organizational capabilities, and trained workers before these crises occur, and we must have an all-hands man your battle stations response when they do. The idea of world government is, of course, hardly new. It's an enduring dream that traces back to Bronze Age Egypt and the ancient Chinese emperors. In the modern era, it's been espoused by many prominent people. Both the League of Nations and the United Nations, despite their many limitations, were incremental steps in this direction. However, in recent decades, the traditional idea of a top-down world government has largely been replaced by a more democratic vision of global governance, a global system of limited self-governing regimes and cooperative action with respect to specific transnational problems and domains rather than an overarching, unified, all-powerful political authority. A significant degree of this kind of global governance has already evolved piecemeal over time in various specialized areas: international law, the law of the sea, international aviation, world trade, and more. But there is now an urgent new imperative. A recent review concluded, quote, among the different fields of global governance, environmental management is the most wanting in urgent answers to the crisis in the form of collective action by the whole human community, end quote. I believe we need to both expanded global governance with respect to climate change and other urgent environmental and health problems, and an enhanced role for world government. What I'm calling a global governance initiative is grounded in the belief that there must be a major change in the dynamics of global politics and in the relationships between nations. A significant course change will be needed to meet our growing crisis. Our current global system of deeply competitive nation states must shift gears and become much more cooperative in order to deal with this overarching global challenge. The competition, conflicts of interest, and sometimes bitter animosities that now exist between various countries must be subordinated to a collective survival mission with shared benefits and costs. New financial resources and new organizational capabilities will also be required to stand up to these hurricane force headwinds. Only if we have an all-out cooperative effort will we be able to cope with the furies that we are now facing, I believe. Indeed, our greatest threat may be at each other and a regression into tribalism and violent conflict. We tend to forget that collective violence and warfare has been one of the major themes in human history, going back as far as the evidence allows us to go. We're now facing the very real prospect of an era of terrorism and climate wars, or worse. Equally important, the challenges that we face going forward will very often transcend national borders, from mega droughts to lethal disease pandemics and the growing hordes of climate refugees. These crises will overwhelm the ability of many countries to deal with them unaided. We're seeing that already. A concerted international effort is going to be necessary. The basic idea here is to create an overlay of new global level services and support functions, along with new financial resources, linked to a negotiated set of social contracts with each country, rather than trying to supplant them or to deny their sovereign autonomy and impose solutions. In other words, the overall strategy would be to expand the scope and capabilities of existing international institutions, along with some added political constraints and reforms, in return for an array of positive benefits. I call it the incremental reform model, or the big carrot, small stick strategy. However, there is an obvious prior question: how do we get from here to there? What we are talking about is a major shift in global politics and in governance. There must be a change of hearts and minds at all levels, within and between the world's deeply divided nations, including especially the leaders and influential citizens in our most powerful countries. They must come to see that it is in their own self-interest, as well as an urgent moral imperative, to lead the way forward to a new global social contract and a collective effort to deal with the challenges we face. In his important 2019 book, Upheaval, the well-known author scientist Jared Diamond had several case studies of national crises where a major course change was achieved. I think these can provide us with instructive models for the global crisis we face today. Among other things, Diamond says, one, there must be a broad public consensus that a crisis exists and that something must be done about it. Two, there must be a general readiness to make major changes. Three, there must be political initiative and a willingness to take responsibility for responding to the threat. Four, there must be a clearly defined goal and a practicable solution. And five, there must be competent and skilled leadership to inspire and implement the necessary changes. I would add to this list that we also need to have sufficient resources and other necessary means. My favorite example is America's entry into World War II. For several years after the outbreak of the war in Asia and Europe, America remained deeply isolationist and seemed bent on getting involved in the growing conflict. This changed literally overnight after the surprise Japanese air attack on our Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. It's now Pearl Harbor Day for our environmental crisis, but there may not be any traumatic psychological event equivalent to Pearl Harbor to catalyze our resolve Instead, we may have to rely on the alternative model provided by the likes of the women's suffrage movement in the early 20th century, or the civil rights legislation in the early 1960s, where grassroots political movements inspired by effective leaders gradually won converts and built political support until finally the economic and political establishment got the message and made major changes. A similar process of education and consensus building, aided, alas, by the increasing frequency of climate-related natural disasters, may be our best hope for avoiding the metaphorical hangman's noose. To paraphrase Samuel Johnson's famous line, "Nothing concentrates the mind like the prospect of being hanged in the morning." It's time for us all to look ahead and concentrate our minds on this life and death challenge. Again, there's a detailed recipe for this change in my new book. There's a spreading mood of gloom in various quarters these days about our environmental crisis. I call it the Doomsday Caucus. It includes a significant number of the world's leading scientists, as well as many mainstream environmental experts, professional writers, political activists, and others who've basically given up hope that there can be any technological, economic, or political fixes for global warming and our ecological overshoot as a species. To these pessimists, the apocalypse is already baked in. Anything we can do now is too little too late. I believe that such defeatism in the face of our global life and death challenge provides a classic example of a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's a great deal more that can be done to mitigate the potential future damage and prevent a full-scale ecological Armageddon. I believe that doing everything we can to deal with the crisis is far better than not dealing with anything. I much prefer the risk of failure to the certainty of failure. To sum up then, we are confronting an unprecedented survival crisis where even our worst case scenarios may not be realistic enough. Menacing new climate-related disasters seem to be an almost daily occurrence these days. Witness the Los Angeles fires. Our survival problem clearly transcends and obliterates national boundaries. We are collectively in peril. Any we versus they or survival of the fittest response will likely be hugely costly and self-defeating, and we cannot depend on capitalism and market forces to solve our problems. As we have seen time and again, when the have-nots are desperate and have nothing left to lose, they will do desperate things. And so too will desperate nations. We could all pay a terrible price for inaction. The key to our success as a species has always been cooperation, adaptive innovation, and synergy. And this must define our path going forward. In order to respond effectively to the destructive challenges that lie ahead, we must mobilize a significant share of the world's surplus wealth and prepare for the future now. Because the future is already underway, we must also undergird everything we do with the fair society principles, equality, equity, and reciprocity, and we must make a collective commitment to a basic needs guarantee. Above all, we must have governance at all levels that is dedicated to the public trust and a global economic system and private sector that serves the common good. Everyone must do his or her part for the collective survival enterprise. the superorganism. There must be reciprocal benefits for all stakeholders and capital and contributors in return. I believe the very survival of our superorganism and its many parts must now become our overriding priority because we are deeply, inescapably interdependent. To quote Benjamin Franklin once again, we must all survive together or we will go extinct separately. It's time to concentrate our minds on the hangman's noose. Both our past and our future as a species, our ancient heritage and our ultimate faith are calling us to respond to this. It's Pearl Harbor Day. It's time for us to choose now. To quote the New York Times columnist Tom Friedman, later will be too late. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take questions or responses.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Well, what a sobering talk, and thank you for staying right on your time. We want to do a quick intro of everyone in the process and then do questions. James has his first hand up. Would everybody willing to say a little bit something about who you are, what your research interests are? I can start. I'm John Smart. I'm at the Naval Postgraduate School, and I'm really interested in accelerating change and complex adaptiveness. Who else would like to? James.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see faces finally here. I'm Jim Kaufman. I'm up in Maine at the Mount Desert Island Biological Laboratory. I'm a developmental biologist. My training is in molecular genetics, gene regulation, embryology. But I've got also a long time interest in just change, the problem of change, both evolutionary change and developmental change and how they interact to constrain the direction of evolution. And many of you know my interest, and I won't get into my question here, but I might just say that I probably fall in the more in the doom and gloom camp that Peter, that you were mentioning. Yeah. Although I agree with just about everything you say about both the problem and the severity of the problem and your solution. The big question I have has to do with how we get there, and we can get back to that. So good to meet everybody.
Thank you. Terry, could you go?
So I'm sort of this institute down in Portland, affiliated with Portland State University, and been doing all this stuff. We ran a lecture series for 20 years. Jane Goodall and Stephen Hawking, and unfortunately never got Peter into it.
Fantastic.
And I've met Peter at various systems conferences and stuff over time. My thing now is I'm big into thermodynamics, and in particular I'm into engineering thermodynamics as distinct from the thermodynamics of mechanical thermodynamics of Clausius, Boltzmann, and Gibbs, which I think has been extremely misleading. And we've all been indoctrinated along those lines. Anyway, and I'm very big now into Adrian Bejan, who no one pays any attention to, but
who again?
Adrian Bejan.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. He's at Duke, and I looked at his stuff 20 years ago or something. I said, "Yeah, interesting." And then serendipitously, at a what was it, Thermodynamics 2.0 conference, we ended up met him there. He said, "Oh, we got to talking." I thought, maybe there's something more here. And for the last 2 years, I have been sort of obsessed with, I call it, what hath Bejan wrought? Because he's got some frickin' insight that breaks open a whole bunch of really, really powerful stuff. So
you need to do a presentation on that, Terry. We'd love to hear one later in the year.
I'd love to.
Good. So yeah, Bejan was on our EDU talk list for a while. It looks like he's dropped off. We need to nudge him back on.
Sure.
Who would like to go next? How about Charles on the list here? Charles Fidel.
Charles.
Going down the list.
His microphone's off.
Okay. Well, how about Clement? He's next.
Sure. So I'm Clément Vidal. I'm the co-founder with John Smart of the Evo-Devo universe community. I'm a philosopher. I like to see myself as a big questions philosopher and also as a philosopher with science. So I'm trying to use science as tools to try to answer our biggest questions. And currently I work on two main projects. One is about globalization through the lens of the idea of the noosphere, of the superorganism that we are kind of building. And the other is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, where I also work with astrophysicists. And yeah, that's it.
Wonderful. David, you're next. David Lepois, you're next on the list here.
Yes, hi, thanks. I'm Dave Lepore, and I'm mostly here kind of because of my interest in big history. So with the International Big History Association, we've been most recently looking at complexity in big history, and that's with Andrei Kvartaev. And before we did a Springer volume on the singularity in big history, the trend in singularity trend in big history. So I just want to say thanks to all the people here in the list discussion that I've really gotten a lot out of, and I've read a lot of your books and really got a lot out of them. So thanks to John Clement for organizing this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And Georgie, you're next, sir.
All right, so yeah, thanks everybody for joining today. So my name is Georgie Georgiev. I'm also at the Evo-Devo Institute now. With John, we kind of changed it, and hopefully we could develop some more like this rigorous program of communication and talks, and hopefully collaboration and publications out of it, right? Ultimately, and some new conferences. So I'm a physicist. I'm currently affiliated at two places in Massachusetts, United States. One is Worcester Polytechnic Institute, the other is Assumption University. And I'm interested just in general in cosmic evolution, but how physics principles like Terry said could explain complexification and self-organization. And yeah, recently we have a paper which I will share later on the EDU. But yeah, I think the problem with all evolutionary and developmental processes is the lack of well-established non-equilibrium thermodynamics. As Terry said, we are misled by the second law doom and gloom predictions, which are not true for open systems. Anyway, so that's my presentation. That's what I'm interested in. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Georgie. Gerard, you're next, sir.
Yeah, thank you. And it's indeed very nice to be part of this group. Very interesting people and talks. Thank you. I worked for 17 years at Altera, which is a nature advisory institution, part of the University of Wageningen. And for 30 years, I work already on a theory that now has the name operator theory. I recently wrote a book about it called The Third Law of Evolution and the Future of Life.
Oh, good.
It is just a third law because there is variation and selection that we all know. And then I add dual closure, which is a law that builds new designs. So if you go from bacteria to eukaryotic cells, the design changes, and such designs can be sort of generalized in, I think, a rule, which then creates a hierarchy of system types, which is actually fairly interesting. And I work on that for 30 years. Yeah, that's about it. It's part of my puzzling on big questions and complexity and hierarchy. And so all that kind of stuff, including thermodynamics. I work together with Georgie I talked with David Lepoire recently about big history. I wrote an article on that. So I'm a little bit in everything and nothing. So yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so now Julian, you are next, sir.
Okay, I guess I'm what's euphemistically called an independent researcher. That's a dubious breed. I'm mostly a novelist by background, but I studied a bit of philosophy, and I just created my obsessions. And over the last decade, I've become incredibly obsessed with the idea of cosmological natural selection, the old idea of Lee Smolin, coming out of John Wheeler, that big bangs and black holes are the opposite side of the same singularity, and that universes reproduce with Darwinian evolutionary process. I think that idea was profound and underexplored because it fell into a knowledge shadow, because the evolutionary biologists didn't even hear about it, and the cosmologists said it's an evolutionary theory. Some other guys should deal with this. And so no one's really worked on it. So I've ended up working on it, which led me to John and to Clement, who've done really interesting work at developing that theory. So I'm writing a book on that and extending it and making predictions based on it that seem to be working out. The James Webb seems to be giving us good evidence that an evolutionary approach can actually give you better predictive insights into the early universe than the mainstream theories, which is really interesting. And as a result of that, I've got some funding now from Emergent Ventures, Tyler Cowen's funding mechanism for moonshot ideas, and some from O'Shaughnessy Ventures as well, which is also interested in disruptive new approaches to areas of science that are a little bit blocked. That's what I'm doing.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for that share. Okay, we have the privilege of Bob Ulanowitz is on as well. Bob, can you hear us?
Okay, yes, I can hear you. And John, I want to thank you for the invitation. I found Peter's work very interesting, and I'm very glad to be a part of the Evo-Devo conversation. I'm trained as a chemical engineer with a specialty in thermodynamics, and I tend to agree with Terry Bristol that our present thermodynamics is lacking somewhat, and I have my own ideas, especially on the idea of entropy, which is very much misunderstood and has been misunderstood for about 150 years. My interest in my career was mostly on networks of ecological systems, who eats whom and by how much, and I developed a number of network algorithms to analyze network systems. My ideas, however, are mostly about phenomenological. I agree with Terry that we really have to be cautious about theory and look more for phenomenology, because thermodynamics is all about phenomenology. It doesn't belong to the physicists, it belongs to the engineers. And we've got to get going on that. I see the world as a dialectic between constraint and lack of constraint, absolute lack of constraint. And you can quantify this in terms of information theory, and we can really analyze networks as being either very heavily constrained or, not constrained at all. But anyway, I don't know. I just want to say one more thing. I'm talking to you from Florida, the University of Florida. And Peter, you're talking to us from California. And there's an enormous difference in the way the electorate here differs from that of California. I've been working trying to conserve the springs. Florida has some of the world's best springs, or had some of the world's best springs, which are disappearing and being polluted at a terrible rate. You cannot get anyone in our legislature to worry about that. Oh, they'll say something like they really are, but they're not. They'll put up $30 million, and it all goes to things like sewage treatment plants for developments. You can get nowhere here. it's just a cry for help, I guess. I'll also just sign off and saying I'm sort of a Franciscan by belief, and I feel that we're going to have to, the only way we're going to get out of this and survive is to learn how to be happy and dignified with less. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that mini sermon. We needed it.
By the way, I went to flight training in Pensacola, so I know a little bit about Florida, except that was a different Florida from your Florida.
Amen. Yeah, Ruben Askew was okay. I know.
Okay, we have Sophie, Julian's daughter, next. Sophie, can you share a little bit about who you are and your views of what you're interested in? We'd love to hear it.
I can. I'm not a scientist. I'm currently studying film in Galway, in Ireland. So I'm in an entirely different world from you guys, but I do talk to my dad a lot. So I kind of know what's going on kind of with a lot of you guys. And yeah, I find it very interesting. Even though I'm not heading, in towards a world of science necessarily, career-wise. But this has been a very interesting experience, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. All right, we have one person left, Steve Kerouac.
I think the mic is on.
There we are.
The Kerouac. I couldn't get rid of the Kerouac. My real last name is Walk.
I know. Was it
John
Jack?
knows?
Is that
John
on
knows
the road? Is that the reference on the road? What is that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a Kerouac through my grandmother, and I stole his name in my own singing and songwriting career. When I first met John, a long time ago, I impromptu wrote a song about forecasting the future. We had a great lot of fun with the song around a few beers one night. But so I couldn't get rid of the Kerouac. But my last name is Watt. My background is also electrical engineering. That's where I started out. I've always been curious and creative more than I've been a scientist, and it's led me to Evo-Devo and larger issues in the world that I've enjoyed for years reading about and trying to integrate into my own thinking that way. I've read some interesting things recently about the world and how it's moving, and I'd have to summarize them elsewhere. But it seems daily somebody has some new information about how propaganda works and how power works and how communication is changing and how we manipulate communication and how that makes more difficult things Peter has been pointing us to. But we will take
Good.
that.
Well, we look forward to your
insight.
talk. We know that you're going to be the next Scholars Talk. We
Yeah,
have
right.
we have Scholars Talk set up for February, March, and April. I guess we're May is open now. So Bob, Julian, Gerard, anyone, we'd love to just email us if you. I don't know. We'd love to have the second Fridays be a kind of a tradition for all of us. And we're gonna figure out the format, but we kind of like this half an hour and then introduction to what's on our point, what's all of us on our tip, and then jump into questions and answers. But what I forgot to do at the beginning was a proper introduction of Peter. So I'm going to do it super fast, and then we can jump into Q&A. So Peter started as a naval aviator, wrote in science at Newsweek for 2 years. Then he did his PhD at NYU in social science, life science, interdisciplinary topic. Then he postdoced at the Institute for Behavioral Genetics, University of Colorado. And then for 9 years, he was teaching in the human biology program, the famous human biology program at Stanford. And he had research appointments in the behavioral genetics lab and the engineering economic systems department at the same time as he was doing that. And then for 30 years after, more now, he jumped into complexity. He jumped into his own institute, which I highly recommend, complexsystems.org, if you haven't checked it out. It is a trove of fascinating information. He's published numerous papers and 9 books, Sophie. Think about that. Okay, 9. That's daunting. His first famous one was the Synergism Hypothesis, a progressive theory of evolution, 83. Then he did The Fair Society, Science of Human Nature, Pursuit of Social Justice, Synergistic Selection in 2018, which deeply goes into how cooperation emerges in complex groups, and has shaped human psychology. And his latest 2 are Superorganism, Toward a New Social Contract for Our Endangered Species, which we just heard a chapter from, and Evolution on Purpose, Teleonomy, or Internal Goal-Directedness, and How It Influences Evolution, which came out also 23 with MIT Press. So what an amazing set of accomplishments. Our hat is off to you, sir. Thank you for everything you've done for us. I think we just, this Evo-Devo community, and for those who are coming for the first time, the way we approach these concepts of evolution and development, our evolutionary processes have a lot less constraint in them than developmental processes. So it's back to Bob Ulanowitz's fundamental dichotomy there. There is a constraint, deconstraint, dialectic that seems fundamental to complex systems at every level. And we all in this community love trying to better understand that. And, we're all learning so much from each other. And so thank you everyone for attending. And if any scholar here who's publishing, who's interested in these topics, we welcome you to join our community. Come on in. And so why don't we get to questions? First up was Jim Kaufman, and anyone else feel free to either raise your hand or jump in. So Jim.
Yeah, Peter, as I said, I agree with you on the severity of the nature and the severity of the problem. And I also like your proposed solution. I think it has to be democratic. I think equity is critical, social equity, economic equity. We have, as Terry pointed out in the comments, we have a huge problem here in this country of wealth disparity. We have basically one person now who's the richest person in the world calling the shots. But I think, there's one thing that you didn't talk about, which I grapple with on a daily basis. And we're talking about constraints and how change is constrained. And it seems to me the biggest constraint and the hardest problem that we have to negotiate to get from point A to point B, which is the solution that you're proposing, is psychological and cultural. So we're basically apes. We are apes, and we're not that far from our closest cousins, the chimpanzees. And our behaviors, if you look at our tribal behaviors, they're not too different from what chimpanzees do. If you've ever watched the Chimp Kingdom on Netflix, you can see how close we are to that. And so I guess the problem that I'm wondering if you can comment on, how do you address that psychology? And now it's even worse because we have social media, we have AI, and these folks who have all the resources, the oligarchs, know how to push those buttons, those chimpanzee buttons, and get people to behave like the apes that they are, which is exact opposite direction of where you're saying we need to go, which I agree we need to go. And so we're going in the opposite direction right now with the latest election and with the rest of the world too. So how do you deal with that psychological problem and the constraints on psychological change, which are preventing that kind of needed change?
Well, I did briefly address that in the talk. I address it in more depth in the book. And in another article that I'm writing now. I certainly agree with you that that's the prior question, and if not the toughest question. But the fact is that we're no longer chimpanzees. We have evolved. Our psychology has evolved as we came down onto the ground out of the trees, for starters, and had to live as cooperative groups on the ground. I go through this in a couple of my recent books. There were generations of our earliest ancestors who had to survive by cooperating. Otherwise, they would not survive because they were subject to group hunting ground predators like the pala hyenas that could completely wipe them out if they didn't defend themselves collectively. So they developed cooperative behaviors and tools and weapons that enabled them to survive and ultimately prosper living on the ground. So there's a lot of evidence that humans have the capacity to adapt. And that's why it's so important to get past the fake news and to focus on what is really happening and address those real problems. So I consider that the people who are fighting against all of the daily lies that we're getting, including the most recent one that there was some declaration that that Biden signed that meant that there wasn't going to be water in Southern California. That is just absurd. You know, and he got that from one of his minions, who in turn got it from Fox News. So it was another Fox News lie that has been perpetrated by the man at the top. And that's what we've got to resist.
Okay, next questions. We have Terry, Georgie, and then I'm the third. Anyone else, throw your hand up and get in the queue. So Terry Bristol.
Okay, Peter. So I want to go. I have like a million questions for you, but one thing is, I was noticing when John Smart was going through your deal, what attracted me to you first, the first thing when I noticed you on the existence of the world was from an article, which actually I think at 2 issues of some journal, and the article was called Thermoeconomics, and it was an article you did with Steve Klein.
Yeah.
And I thought it was brilliant. And it led me also to Steve Klein, who I think is also brilliant. And
he's dead now, of course.
Yeah, he had a lot of nice things, nasty things to say about entropy, which is cool. but how did you discover Steve Klein? How did you guys put that together?
Well, first of all, he was a fellow professor at Stanford. He was in the engineering economics school, and he was particularly interested in thermodynamics, and I think that his inspiration was important to me. I was very dissatisfied with the second law of thermodynamics, which I didn't consider a law. I saw too many exceptions, and he convinced me of the fact that I was on the right track. So we ended up collaborating. It was actually, there were 2 articles in the journal. Forgetting which journal they were now. I've got them in a book of mine, reprinted. And I've always felt that that's still one of the best things that's ever been done on thermodynamics, because it was very skeptical.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant, really. And it was when you also were introducing the synergy idea in there. I don't know whether it was quite as explicit, but I just thought you guys were on a really good track. And you know, I thought I like to think that most of what came out of you later on had some base in that, but it's not. I don't think most people have seen that. So maybe you should post those, you know, those two issues or articles or something, or I could post them. I have them somewhere here.
Oh, well, I could do that. Sure.
Yeah, I think they were really insightful, and I think again, Steve Klein went on to write a lot of stuff about, I mean, from an engineering point of view, about the design of society and how engineering education should be changed, because engineers are about design, but they're about design not just of engines, but they're design of society, and had a lot to do with values and the whole bit. So
yeah. Yeah, one of the titles of those articles was "To Be or Entropy."
yes.
Little Shakespearean.
Yeah. He was very angry, so to speak, about entropy.
Yeah.
He had one statement I loved. He said, when you're talking about thermodynamics, as soon as someone brings up entropy, shoot them.
Yeah.
All right, let's move to the next question. Georgia.
All right, so yeah, thanks again, Peter. So I just wanted to say, Sophie, we may need a movie director for some advertisement or some
Absolutely.
nice promotion for the EDU, for the EDI, for the institute, right? So
Absolutely.
No problem.
at some point.
You know where to find me.
We have
Yes.
shekels to pay too. We have a small amount of money, so yeah. We'd love to.
Definitely.
She's very good. She's very good.
Yeah. And also, I just wanted to say something. I emailed John and Clement today. I think we should make something like Evo-Devo digest, where we could put all of our recent books and papers and distribute them, and like a list of all of the achievements, just to kind of spread the word and make them more
Yeah, if anyone knows
influential.
how to do that, just let Georgie and I know. I think we might call it Evo-Devo Complexity Digest, right? That would be
Or whatever, yeah.
that's our unique take on complexity. You know, it's
Mhm.
network theory, and it's all these interesting things that are kind of neglected right now.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll do that. So just keep an eye for that. So Peter, I think what you were talking, I couldn't stop thinking about the tragedy of the commons. I think we still haven't solved that problem, because every country thinks the planet, somebody else should take care of the planet, and they shouldn't be the one. I think that's literally what's happening, because if you ask US or China or Russia to stop polluting, they say, well, the other guys are polluting, so why should I be like preserving nature? So somehow for several hundred years since we identified this problem, we haven't been able to find a solution. I mean, you mentioned like institutions and global government, but so far I think it's not enough. I can't
The
stop
oil
also-
companies have found the solution.
Which
Drill.
one?
No, there's a lot of politics there.
I think that when the private companies start like bearing the costs of ecological disasters, maybe then they'll feel the pain and the narrative will change, but I'm not sure. There is a study by Robert Carneiro, he's an anthropologist. So in the 60s, he went into the Amazon rainforest and he looked at societies of different sizes. I mean, autonomous villages, like, so they are isolated from others. So what he found was that if the number of institutions in those villages didn't increase, as they increased in population, they started a war and they broke into two pieces. So it seems like what you were saying, that the institutions are kind of the glue that keeps, the bigger the system is, the more institutions it needs to keep it together. Otherwise, we have what we have right now. Since the Second World War, we haven't put any new institutions after the United Nations. And it seems that maybe that's part of the problem. I don't know. And,
yeah, I think a clearly defined common problem where individuals can contribute to the solution is really a kind of a fundamental principle. We are motivated if we think that there is a problem that we can help solve, and we have the means to do so. And that's really the essence of it at every level. Whether we'll get there in time or not, we'll find out.
So I'm sure you know, like, there is a book named Anti-Fragility by, I forgot the name right now.
Nicholas Taleb.
Taleb, yes, Taleb. Yeah. So his argument is that systems need some perturbations, like ecological systems, let's say, to change the landscape so they could evolve new species. Obviously not big perturbations like the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs, but on smaller scale. Otherwise, let's say in Australia, you haven't had ecological perturbations for many years, and you still have these old-fashioned animals that didn't have any reason to evolve further. So how do you see all of the things that you were describing? Are they solvable so they could help us find new technologies maybe, or new governance to kind of overcome these problems, or they are so big that we may be like the dinosaurs?
Well, it's a little bit of, all of the above. There are some promising technologies that there hasn't been much publicity about, in some quarters, and that's the new fusion technology, which may provide really not unlimited but large, a very large amount of essentially free energy, and provide therefore a means which can be used in various ways to help us with solving our various environmental problems. So fusion technology is part of the solution, but it's only part of the solution of part of the problem.
So maybe we need some, as you said, this Pearl Harbor moment to jump on, like, abandoned fossil fuels and jump on developing those new technologies. But I feel, honestly, I'm an optimist because I feel that we can't predict what we're gonna invent in the future or what solutions we're gonna come up with. And sometimes in the biggest crisis, we find the best solutions because we have no other options. And even though I cannot say what it is, we'll figure it out. I think I'm an optimist that, like, our species will continue. I'm blindly believing in evolution, if you want to put it that way.
Georgie, my question was after yours, and it kind of tail ends onto yours. Peter, I wonder, when you think of the anti-fragility concept, where a catastrophe makes a system stronger, like it rearranges the network and improves it, like an immune system, an attack of an immune system increases the strength of it,
but it's not the problem that causes the solution. The solution arises out of forces that are available. The notion that the bigger the catastrophe we have, the better we'll be because we'll find solutions. It doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, but I'm not arguing that. What I wanted to ask you is, I know that in biological networks, when the network has the right properties and when the catastrophe isn't too, it is right sized, let's say, then you get the anti-fragility that Nick Taleb talks about, where you rearrange the structures within the network to make it more resilient by stressing it. And my question is, do you see any mechanisms that where stress is increasing synergy in human society? Do you see any ways that networks are actually getting more adaptive as a result? Human networks, knowledge networks, technology networks, whatever kind of networks you might think about when you think about synergy. Like, how do you see the dynamics of synergy go? Is it growing as a function of complexity? What is happening with it in your view?
Well, let me take a step back. I define synergy simply as a combined or cooperative effect produced by two or more molecules, genes, parts, elements, societies. It's the effects produced by cooperative partnerships. And what the synergy is sometimes the motivator for the potential for synergy is the potential motivator for cooperation. But that takes a sentient being with an ability to understand those kinds of dynamic cause and effect relationships. We began to develop that capacity in humankind and its predecessors, even with eukaryotes. There's a lot of work being done these days on sentience in bacteria, which is a little mind-blowing. But this, it does seem as though it is a common, if not universal, feature of living systems that they incorporate capacities for adapting, changing, responding to various things, and that has grown over time and still has the potential for growth. So yes, it's a fundamental aspect of the biological world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
We're not just selfish genes.
Yep. Thank you for that. Julian, you're next.
Huh. I think that was great, Peter. Thanks. I'm really glad you're wrestling with this on our behalf, this mega problem. Two things that occurred to me. One is your idea that we're essentially generating a superorganism, but under very difficult circumstances.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Could you?
Oh, sorry. That we're generating a superorganism under difficult circumstances. I like that idea, because I do think we need to all be in the same in-group to pull this off. We need to kind of redefine ourselves into a single in-group, which is a very difficult feat that we have not pulled off before. And if you have any ideas on the whole idea of an exterior threat is good. If there was an asteroid heading towards us, it'd be a lot easier to focus our minds on a common problem. But it seems to be a storytelling problem as well as everything else. The stories we're telling ourselves right now about this crisis are very negative and dystopian and dead end, and we're not telling a coherent story of how we can get out of this cleanly. And do you know anybody is anybody coming up with good metaphors or allegories or stories around this that you find attractive and you think could be built out so that we can have a common story that unites us in the direction we want to go? Because at the moment it's very fragmented and depressing, and the people that write about these things are not telling us stories that are attractive or helpful.
Well, I try to do that a little bit in my recent writings and in this talk today, emphasizing the fact that we need to have a reorientation of our basic understanding of the nature and purpose of human societies. If we see ourselves as fragile, if you like, organisms, living organisms that live in and depend on groups, living in social groups, and if we depend, and if humans have evolved as cooperative, a cooperative species, those things ought to guide our responses to some of the really pressing things that are happening around us and sometimes directly affect us. As I said, having been born and partially grown up in around Pasadena and Malibu Beach, I take it very personally. This is my world that is being burned.
Yeah.
And if we can come to an understanding that there are cooperative ways to deal with these things, preventing future crises or dealing more effectively with future crises, then maybe that will be a motivating factor for us to do it. I think the selfish gene metaphor, the idea that living organisms are basically selfish individuals, getting along by warring with competing with other organisms, and a sort of survival of the fittest metaphor was absolutely the wrong way to understand the human species.
Yeah, I think it was
if we can
disastrous.
erase that model and find a better model to understand who we are, that will be an important first step.
Yeah, because I mean that the Selfish Gene is an incredibly powerful polemical book. I read it when I was young, and it felt really convincing and powerful. And the trouble is, it's not true. And what we need equally convincing and powerful books that are more accurate to our cooperative nature.
Yeah, what about the story that we are cells in a big superorganism and we all depend on each other and we cannot live without each other, which is mostly true, I think. I mean,
mostly
to
true.
think about it.
Yeah, it's like we're at the same stage, really. It's a major evolutionary transition, like from single cells to multicellular organisms, and now we're we are now completely all depending on each other, and we are becoming a superorganism. But I think we need to sort of tell that story in a way that's attractive, that we're not losing our individuality in this superorganism. We're gaining freedom to become fully ourselves because we don't have to do everything, because the other parts of the organism will do the stuff we don't want to or aren't good at doing. And that there's an attractive way of telling this, and there's an unattractive way of telling this. People do not want to be ruled from above as subordinate cells in a superorganism, but they would like to be liberated to be fully themselves in the way, which is actually a really what could happen if we pull it off right, if we do it right. But we need to tell that story.
Yeah, that's why I think the global governance term is really a much better way of describing it. We are in a cooperative group. We're not in a top-down hierarchy, except in certain societies, which we won't get into.
But we do need to find a language around that is attractive, that people get, because if they hear global governance, even that it doesn't quite. It sounds like they're being told what to do from above in a way that might not. I think the language around this is going to be really important and worth thinking about.
So if you could make a movie about the cooperative life and interdependence. Sorry, I'm joking.
Absolutely. I really like sci-fi, and that would be an ideal place to put that sort of story.
Because if you think about cells, right, if they are not in an organism, they should be just primitive bacteria. They have to do everything. They cannot be a brain cell. They don't have the freedom to be a brain cell or heart cell, or like they cannot express that, which they gain by cooperating, right, synergistically. So I think that's a good story.
Because I think
there was a book many years ago, and I think in fact they made a movie with it, about the threat of an invasion from Mars. That worked. It had a very unifying effect.
We need to asteroid now.
Make a comment. So Dawkins actually backed off the selfish gene. He wrote this book called The Extended Phenotype. He said, oh, wait a minute. Why are all these other organisms? Oh, wait a minute. They're going to feed me. In order for me to advance my genes, I need these other things in it. He's too much of a wimp to, really come out and say, oop, I made a mistake. Although he sort of did. If you look at his the latest edition of his Selfish Gene, he really says, oh, I didn't really mean that, because
his introduction.
Obviously there's this, that if it's not just all for one for all, because I have to have. Can I just put it? There's a metaphor that coming out of these guys, the deep sea vent guys. There's a guy, Falkowski, wrote a book called Life's Engines. And he talks about at the deep sea vents, these two types, there's two sets of bacteria. So this one set of bacteria uses sulfur at +3 valence, loves it, and its waste product is sulfur at -3 valence or -5 valence. And the other group of bacteria loves it at -5 valence, uses it and exports it at +3. And this is what he forms. He calls it a consortia. This is an interdependent, and it's sort of a homeostatic thing. And the other thing that happens with this, it isn't just going back and forth. It turns out, and this is Peter Mitchell, I guess, is the genius, who figured out that it also advances a hydrogen ion in this process. And that hydrogen ion goes up and connects to the CO2, and that's how higher carbon products are developed. But that idea of the selfishness, I mean, he says one of the things about being in a consortia, you don't want to outcompete everyone else because they're feeding you.
Yeah.
Well, that Life's Engines, I just put the link in the message. That looks fantastic. Does that fit in with your concept of Gaia then? Is that kind of like a step towards this self-balancing Earth cycle, Terry? Is that how you see that?
Well, I mean, he's in there. I mean, Falkowski just goes so far. I mean, there's a whole group of them that are working on the deep sea vents. Life, how did life come forth from the gradients that are down there and stuff. And
see, for me, my intuition is that if we live in a developmental universe, we're going to keep finding more of these kinds of things like this, Life's Engines, that there's these little hidden things that self-balance in ways we didn't appreciate. And that was what my question to Peter was, where's the self-balancing synergistic dynamics? Maybe I'm looking for something that too optimistically, but I just continue to get surprised by what our community brings to understanding development, not just random evolutionary processes.
I'm not
well,
sure.
let's see. I think, do we have any more questions? Terry, you finished? Does anyone else have a question, or should we wrap up here? We've got a little more time here before we hit 2:30.
I could make one follow-up comment on the Falkowski thing. Is the idea of a consortia is kind of cool, because it also has, if you look at it on that kind of global Gaia thing, you sort of like, there's the CO2 producers and the O2 producers. Okay, so the CO2 producers, they give off CO2. We don't love CO2. We're CO2 producers. So the plants and animals, or plants, love the CO2 and they give off oxygen, and that's kind of like a consortium there. And there are all these the concept in it also is just homostasis. There are all these, the planet is this hugely homostatic thing. I'm not, that's one of the things, I'm not too worried about global warming, although I take it seriously. But the planet's been in this more or less homostatic state for like 3.5 billion years. I find it difficult that we're really going to kick it out. There's a lot of buffering. There's a lot of backup systems that maybe haven't kicked in. But the idea of homostasis is really important. But homostasis is a potential state. Okay. So I have all sorts of homostatic properties, like oxygen and salt and all these things that are going on. But that just enables me.
Yes.
Okay. When I go do something and use up some of the homostatic, I come back and come back to my homostatic state. Not coming back to a static equilibrium. I'm coming back to a dynamic equilibrium. Anyway, I'm rambling on here. So.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Charles, I missed your hand up earlier. Could you introduce yourself to people and then ask your question?
Certainly. Thanks, John. Nice to see you again. It's been a while, as you said. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Charles Fadel. I'm founder of the Center for Curriculum Redesign, former electrical engineer, and have been spending a lot of time understanding AI and its implications on education in recent times. In recent times, I've also paid attention to a really interesting book by Christian de Duve, who's a Nobel Prize winner, called The Genetics of Original Sin. And in it, he describes the various aspects of evolution that have made us what we are. And I felt that during this conversation, we were a bit dismissive, a bit too dismissive of the chimp analogy. I mean, look at Jared Diamond positioning us between chimps and bonobos. You can claim that we are basically poorly evolved chimps. We're not really great. And so if you start paying attention to those characteristics, you realize they're far deeper than we accept them to be. Things like that were mentioned earlier, such as the tragedy of the commons, etc. It's about the lack of altruism. Altruism is really a self-directed thing. We are altruistic because it helps us, not because it doesn't. It's really hard.
Then it's not altruistic.
Exactly. So there's no real, true, quote unquote, altruism, philosophically speaking. And so I just wanted to say that we don't have time to go over all of these points and debate them. But the point is, I think we're going a little bit too fast. If we're going to think of solutions, I think we're going too fast in dismissing the root causes. Just an opinion here.
So I just posted Your Inner Ape, Franz de Waal. He makes exactly the same, we're midway between chimps and bonobos. And so if that's where we are, where do you see, Charles? What do you see that is that the story we need to tell? We need to recognize just how much we have to fix, or how many things we have to try and ameliorate in human psychology, or what is the thing?
Yeah, so there's a difference between the story we need to tell versus the story we need to understand before we tell. In other words, a bit like designing your PowerPoint slides. You do your own version, very dense, full of things, and then you simplify it for communication to outsiders.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that we need to do more of the former first, and then figure out what is the right message. Now, it might very well be that what has been said here is indeed the right message. What Julian was talking about earlier, and how to respin the selfish gene, wrong message, etc., etc. That might be the right solution. Not denying that. I just felt that, we need to pay a little bit more attention to the root causes first to see if that is indeed still the right solution.
Thank you. Well, Georgie.
So just to connect to what Charles said, you mentioned AI, and two things come in mind. First, if we're between the chimpanzee and bonobo, the AI has been expected to become our new neocortex, like new evolutionary step in the human brain. So hopefully we'll be able to find the solutions to those problems that we don't see at the moment through that. But
that's an entire conversation on its own, I suspect. And perhaps, John, we can schedule that for some other time.
Yeah, that's a great conversation. Maybe, Charles, you want to talk about AI in education, perhaps, and then tackle that.
Sure. I mean, I'm paying a lot of attention to AI precisely for that purpose. What do you educate for?
Yeah.
If you have some form of AGI, and I say some form because it's hard to define, in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yes. Are you aware of Brave New Words? This is Saul Kahn's new book on AI in education. I just finished reading that in my reading group, and I'd really curious what you would think of that. Maybe we could have an off
Oh.
conversation about it.
Yeah, we can. I'm generally not impressed by his work. Let me just
Okay.
put it this way.
Yeah, I'd
it's
love
very
to know.
superficial, and it's really education as 1980s. And by the way, that's what Bill Gates also espouses. It's this old mindset about education.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what your critiques and where you want to go. Somebody just raised hand and I missed it. Who was it?
It was me. I had a question for Peter, but he seems to have gone off.
Oh,
I
yes.
was going to say that one of the things, he was going back to Plato and so forth. I'm a big philosophy guy. And one of the things is that Plato kept going towards was dialectics. And the whole thing about dialectics is the first thing you do, I mean, you have a dialectic between the competitive and the cooperative people, if you like, or between the, so, and I think in this global governance thing, the argument would be you don't want, somebody come up with the policy or anything. What you want is an active dialectic. And the dialectic, the first, as Plato said, the first, or Socrates says, the first point of entering into a dialectics is that you're wrong. Like, whatever you think you know, it's you don't. And whoever the other person is, they know something that you don't know, and you know something that they don't know. But when you get together and have a dialogue, then there's a potential of something new and creative coming out of it. And I think that's, global governance bothers me, I think, as it does some others, as a kind of a top-down thing. But you have it, supposedly you have it in the parliamentary ideal, of the, and cooperation between, Peter's coming back. So, but, yeah, and I think that however we structure things, the idea that there's just going to be one, one understanding or one dialogue. So Peter, I have a question for you. So in this global governance, I mean, you're back into Plato and so forth, and I think that somehow there has to be a dialectic process between the different, ideologies, so to speak. Yeah, and I think I don't see dialectical process, necessarily. I mean, dialectics looking for synergistic relationships or something like that, sort of looking for win-win relationships and stuff. Is that dialectics? Is that ring a bell for your global structure?
Well, it's a nice word, but something comes to mind which could apply generally to the things we've been talking about here today. I have a phrase which I've used a couple of times in various books, that we, especially in the academic and intellectual sphere, tend to become the captives of our concepts. And we think that our concepts have a reality, and we expect to explain what they are and what they do. And in fact, they are concepts that simply are used to cover a variety, maybe sometimes often in fact, an open-ended variety of different phenomena in the real world. And I try to keep coming back to the real world and the phenomena in it, and not to get sidetracked by some concept. So it applies in spades to synergy, which is not a thing. It's just a metaphor. It's a word that's descriptive of an enormous variety, an open-ended variety of things that happen in the real world. And as long as I can keep that separated in my mind, I won't think that synergy is the solution to our problems. And that applies to what you're talking about too.
You and I had a conversation about who's the guy, Robert Reed. Remember Reed? And you had written a nasty review of his book. It was Evolution by Natural Experiment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Which I went up and met Reed, and after I said, wait a minute, that's great. What are you talking about negative on him? So I went up and met him and talked to him, and I think it's a great book he has on And basically what he's saying is we have to, main thing is we're searching for solutions. We don't just like come up with them from something. Evolution is a process of, running experiments and trying different things out. And that's how we, but we also, it's not just randomly trying things. We're looking for something too. And I think in a sense, what we're looking for is a synergistic relationship, or is some symbiotic relationship or something. We're looking around. So if I make too many fish and you make lots of bread, and maybe we'll trade or something, like that we look for and actually create these new relationships by, I see that's what engineers do in my mind, is they experiment. To find a solution, they don't have it. Oh, I know what the solution is. It's not applied science. They have to go out and discover the solution to whatever their problem is. And they do it by experimentation, exploration, and that's kind of what Reed's point was. So,
I love that book. And is he still alive? Is he still alive, Robert Reed?
I don't know. I lost contact. He got really sick.
Okay.
I was going back and forth, and he got really sick, and then I was talking to his daughter for a while, and then it fell. There's another guy up there. I haven't heard that he died. So,
okay,
but he's not really.
If you can get his contact info, let me know, and we can invite him to the meeting.
I don't think he's conversant at this point, but
okay, all right.
Maybe he recovers. I mean, people recover.
Well, Peter, do you have any last words for us? Because we're at our time, and I think this was pretty great. A half an hour presentation, an hour of us talking. We all love to talk. Do you have any last words for us, sir?
I hadn't thought about that. Give me a few seconds.
Okay.
Well, I really think we need to be cautious about thinking that we can understand, explain, predict the future. That we're sometimes getting better at that, but sometimes I think we're getting worse at that. And so we need to be really self-critical going forward about whether we think we understand what's happening and why it's happening and what can be done about it. I think that would be sort of my conclusion.
Thank you, sir. Well, everyone, it's been an honor and a blessing to be able to spend this time with you. And I look forward to next month with Steve Walk, talking about heuristics and intelligence, how we use heuristics in human intelligence. Should be a fascinating talk. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you guys later.